Hello, I'm Paula Treef, and I'm here today with Charlotte Marcus. We're in Rochester, New York. It's October 31st, 2023, and we'll be doing the interview here shortly. Hi. So to begin, could you please state your name and spell it for us?
All right. My name is Charlotte Marcus,
Just spell Marcus.
Markus.
Great. And what was your name when you were born?
My name was Charlotte Julia DeHaas.
And can you spell DeHaas?
Small D-E, capital H-A-A-S.
Great. And when were you born?
I was born on June 19th, 1921.
So your current age is?
102.
And in what city and country were you born?
Okay. I was born in the town of Bad Pyrmont.
Could you spell that, please?
Yes. Capital B-A-D, capital P-Y-R-M-O-N-T.
And what country is that in?
That is Germany.
Great. Could you tell me, please, the name of your father?
My father's name was Max DeHaas.
And your mother?
My mother's name was Marguerite DeHaas.
And do you know her maiden name?
No middle name.
And do you know her maiden name?
Her maiden name was Frohsinn, Frohsinn.
Okay. And did you have any siblings?
Yes, I had one sister.
And what's her name?
Her name was Marion DeHaas.
And she's older or younger than you?
She was 3 years younger than I.
Okay. And were there other people living in your home besides your parents and your sister and you?
Yes, my grandparents were living in the same home. They were my father's parents.
And their names?
Their names were Michael DeHaas and Tilly DeHaas.
And your father, what was his occupation?
My father was an agent. He had a different kind of business.
Meaning what? When you say a different kind of business?
Well, he was not working for anybody else. He was working for himself at first, and he had I can't explain that. They were scrubbing cloth with his own label, and the label depicted a hare sitting on his back legs.
Oh.
Yeah. And he did very well. In later years, he worked for a very prominent spice house, wholesale, and so he always visited either hardware stores for that scrubbing cloth, or later on with the spice house, he visited grocery stores, and it was all wholesale.
So he was selling those products.
He was selling those products.
And your mother, did she work outside of the home?
No, my mother did not.
Okay. So we'd like to begin really by asking you just about your early memories of life in your home, of your parents, your siblings. You know, this is way before the war experience began. So what can you tell us about, like, your earliest memory of your mother?
I think my earliest memories are my father taking my hand and telling me that I had a baby sister, and taking me up to their my parents' bedroom where my mother was in bed with this little dark bundle next to her. And I can't really remember my reaction. I don't think I had a reaction at all.
Hmm.
I just looked at it, and unemotional.
And what was your memory of your father? Like what was your relationship with him like when you were young?
I'm sorry, I
What
didn't.
was your relationship like with your father when you were young?
Oh, my dad. I had a very close relationship with my dad. Yes.
What was he like? Can you give us a
He was
picture
a
of him a
very,
little?
he enjoyed life. He was the kind of man who was not all that emotional, but he was steady.
Hmm.
And you had the feeling that you were loved. He would take me and my sister later on every Shabbat. We would go on a hike in the woods. And before that, he would stop at a apothecary, apoth-
Apothecary. Yeah, it's a tough one.
and buy American gum, and we each got a piece.
Hmm.
And then he would go with us into the mountains and he would start singing German folk songs. He had a nice baritone voice, and I would join. And the minute I joined, he would he would harmonize. My sister couldn't hold a tune, but she occupied herself with other things. She played school teacher with the bushes and the trees.
So your father was someone, you said he was steady. And how about your mother? What was she like?
My mother was not all that, well, both my parents were not that demonstrative. I mean, we had the feeling that it was safe, that we were loved, we were well taken care of. There was a certain amount of discipline. Our days were regimented in a way, but we always had time to play. We had a nanny who took care of us until we were school age.
Hmm.
And my mother was not a well person. She had a lot of different medical problems.
Did the nanny live in the house with you?
No,
Hmm.
she had her own place, but she would come every day,
To take care of
spend
you
the
and your
day.
sister, yeah.
Yes.
Can you remember the house you grew up in? Could you
Yes,
describe that for me a little
yes,
bit?
I have pictures, yes. The house, which is still standing, was a Tudor, Tudor style with the exposed beams, and it was large. We had a small hotel, strictly kosher, and so we had summer guests.
Oh,
And I was spoiled, very spoiled,
what do you mean by
by
that?
the guests. Well, I had a good singing voice, even when I was very small. And I remember they had me singing for them, and they gave me a lot of attention.
So you had this hotel was your home. You're saying that you had guests who came and paid to be in your home
Yes,
in the summers, and that's because Bad Pyrmont was a spa. Is that right? That Bad Pyrmont was a
it
spa,
was.
hot
Yes, it was a
springs
resort town, and
resort
it
town.
still is. Yes,
I see. I
yes.
see. And you said that things were regimented. What do you mean by that?
Well, there was a certain thing to do things. You got up in the morning, you had breakfast, and you had a lunch. Usually, the lunch consisted of a meal with different courses for the guests. We children had our own meals. I was a very finicky eater. I didn't eat, period.
The children ate separately from
Oh,
your
yes,
parents.
the family always did eat separately. And it was my mother's, um, how should I tell? she was very worried about me. I was extremely anemic, pale-faced and skinny, and wouldn't eat.
So she was worried about you. That's why she was you were having big meals. Is that what you mean?
Right. She was worried about my, being undernourished. I had to go to our family doctor once a week, and he put me under a light. God, I can't think of it. I'm sorry.
That's okay.
It was a special kind of light.
To help with your anemia?
Yeah, well, it was to strengthen me. It's the kind of light that you get when you go into the mountains.
Yes. That's fine. That's fine. And so you weren't really sickly, doesn't sound like.
I was, in a way. I
Oh,
was,
you were?
yes.
Okay.
Even though we were in a place where we could get free bath, and so we did. We were picked up by a carriage with horses, an upholstered carriage where, it was reserved for the guests because nobody had a car in those days. And we would be taking, my sister and I would be taking to a bathhouse, and we would be getting a bath, and it was so nice. It was sunken into the ground, into the floor, and we would step down into this, and it was, it turned yellow, and then it turned green, and it was all pine needles.
Oh.
It was a powder, and it was smelled so good. And we would take that bath, and it was to strengthen us. That was the belief. And we did that for one whole summer. Yeah.
And then during the year when the guests were not there, what was the schedule like then? The regiment when
the
talked about
guests
being
were
regiment.
gone,
Yeah, the guests you said were there in the summer.
they were just there over the season, which usually ran from the middle of May until almost the end of August.
Okay.
And then we moved our bedrooms back down from way up there, the third floor, back to the second floor. And my grandparents would move to another room as their bedroom, which was given up for guests.
I see.
Yes.
And you said your grandparents also lived in the home.
Yes, they lived downstairs.
What was your relationship like with them?
Oh, it was great. If I didn't like anything upstairs at my parents', I would go downstairs and see what they had to eat. And my grandfather was a rabbi, and I could not talk to him or go in the living room until after he said his tefillin, because he was saying his morning prayers. And so I waited outside, and my grandmother would go, like that.
So you
Had
knew
to
you
be
had
very
to keep
quiet.
very quiet.
And then when the door opened, I would go in, and my grandfather would be sitting in a recliner chair, old-fashioned chair. He was smoking a big pipe that went all the way to the floor, and he had his kippah on, and he would have a book on his knee, and he would read me Andersen's fairy tales every single morning until I was school age. He'd take me on his lap, and I can still hear his voice sometimes, and puffing on his pipe. And he would read me Andersen's fairy tales. He would not read me Grimm's fairy tales because he thought they were not for young ears.
Too scary.
Too grim.
Too grim.
Yes.
Yeah. And what about the town itself, Bad Pyrmont? Like where was your house located? What kind of neighborhood was that?
Just about in the middle of the town. Just a short way up from our house, there was the main road that led to a square that was called the Oh, Brunnenplatz. What would that be? Brunnenplatz. Like a
Like a central square
well,
or
yeah,
a
it
main
was more or
square?
less for guests and for people who lived in the town because it was geared to the waters there. There were th- there was a beautiful, huge building that had great big glass doors that went all the way up in the summer.
Mhm.
So it was all open. And that was where you got your
Is it the
spring
treatments?
water. It was spring water that came out of the ground, but it was healing water. There were different types of water.
Mhm.
So
So this was a specifically spring water for that people came for the baths
yeah,
for
it was
healing.
like take Saratoga Springs, something like that,
Mhm.
only much more sophisticated at that time.
And was there a Jewish section in this town? Like
No,
it was
no,
very mixed, or
no. There were
no?
lots of Jewish guests in the town, besides everybody else, of
Mhm.
course. And there were beautiful restaurants. There was outdoor eating at any time. And there were always in the afternoon, just like the English have their tea, high tea, we had coffee and cake
Sounds like a lovely
at a
place.
certain time.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was a beautiful childhood, really.
And when you went to school, you were talking about when you were little and sitting with your grandfather and have those nice memories. Then tell me a little bit about when you started school, or when you and your sister were in school.
Okay.
What was that like?
I started school when I think I was almost 7 years old because I was so thin and so weak with, you know, I wouldn't, I wouldn't eat that normally at age 6, I think you would start first grade, but they let me wait until I was 7 to get more strength. The thing is that one summer I went to my my mother's mother away from the house. I was sent away every summer practically when I was growing up. Once in the a couple of times to the mountains, once to the seaside. They did everything that our family doctor recommended because I was so anemic.
Mm.
So a change of air was the thing. They tried the Harz Mountains.
So did you have family in those places when they
No,
sent you?
no. They were big, it was like camping, but not, they weren't cabins. It was a house for the children,
Okay.
you know.
So there would be a house for children to be sent to kind of strengthen them,
Children,
you're
and
saying.
they had what you might call house mothers. They were young women who were supervising us.
Yeah.
We weren't left to fend to ourselves at all.
And what did you do when you were there in the
Well,
summers?
there were games to play. There were hikes we took, and there were a lot of activities. But actually, it didn't do much good because I was so terribly homesick.
So
You know,
you didn't want to
very
be there,
homesick. Yeah.
and you'd be gone all summer, even when this is when the
No,
guests are
it
coming.
was just a matter of a month.
I see.
Yeah.
And did it help your health?
Not really. I think my mother's mother was the one who finally took me to a specialist in her town. And they found out that I had worms.
No kidding. So that's what was causing the problems that you were having.
After she gave me some, I still remember the little white pills, and those worms went. And then I started eating, and I haven't stopped since then.
So then you became healthy and more robust.
I became healthy.
So that's when you were young, like
Well, I
5 or
was
6?
about, I think maybe around 7 years old, something like that.
Okay, so that's
Yeah.
when you started school, you said,
Right.
too. Well, that's good to know. So then let's go back to what school was like for you when you started school. You were
It was
starting to
a
feel better.
it was called Volksschule, which was the first school you went to after kindergarten. And it started at the first grade and it went up to the fifth grade. But you could start in the fourth grade. You could start going to high school, which I did.
In the fourth grade,
After completing the fourth grade.
after completing
Yes.
fourth grade. Okay.
Yes.
And so what was school like, let's say up until before you started high school?
In high school,
No, before you started high school.
before.
Yeah. Did
I
you
was
have,
still in elementary school.
and so how did that, were there like a group of a
We
certain
had
number
I
of
had
kids?
friends. I had my best girlfriend lived right across the street from us, and I used to go over there for Christmas, New Year's, Jewish holidays, Jewish holidays were spent at home.
Hmm.
Yeah.
So your best friend wasn't Jewish. She did, or did she
No,
celebrate?
no, she wasn't Jewish.
She wasn't Jewish.
No,
Hmm.
no. By the time I grew up, the Jewish congregation had dwindled down to very few people compared to what it used to be,
I see.
because the economy was not that good. Young people would leave in search of other jobs or better schooling, going to university, that type of thing.
So I want to ask you about specifically about what it was like being Jewish there. But first, I'd just like to go back to the school. So you're in school and you had friends, your best friend
Yes,
nearby.
right.
What was a school day like?
A school day was really not that different than it would be here. We brought our own lunch. We didn't go to school on Saturday because of Shabbat. Other kids, non-Jewish kids, of course, had to go.
I see.
We were excused. It was a thing that we did. There was no animosity that I remember. There were some people who did say things to my father once in a while. There was always an element of anti-Semitism somewhere, but not to the point where anybody would be disturbed about it, because, see, my father was the kind of man who would not really tolerate things like that.
It's like, so can you give me so let's talk about that, about being Jewish there. Can you give me an example of that when you said things might be said, or
Well,
he wouldn't tolerate things? What?
my father was a wit. He had a good comeback. I remember him telling me something that happened when he was pushing my baby buggy with me in it, and a man who was known to make snide remarks about our faith, our religion, looked into the carriage, and there I was with blonde hair and blue eyes, and he said, "Max, where did you get that beautiful Christ child?" He was, and my father said, "The good Lord sent her to me just to aggravate you."
So he had a quick comeback.
He had a
you're
quick
saying.
comeback, yes.
So you were aware of Jews and non-Jews in the town.
I did. When I grew up, yeah. When I
Yeah.
was aware of it, I was already, I would say, maybe 8 or 9 years old.
And some of that was because there were sometimes comments that were made. Also, you didn't go to school on Saturday, and some of the kids. What other things made you aware?
The
of it?
kids never said anything.
Okay.
The kids they were either your friend or they weren't. But that had nothing to do with that. You didn't get that feeling that they avoided you because you were different in some ways. I had a beautiful childhood, really, without any of those disturbances.
Those disturbances
Until I was
tensions.
9 years old. Then it changed.
Okay, so Before you tell me about that, because that's obviously I want to know that. I just want to get a little bit more of a feel for daily life. So you
Okay.
had friends, you went to school.
Yes.
Your sister was younger than you. Your grandparents were living downstairs, and you were close to them. You're saying. What about things like what did you do for fun? What did your family do when the family got together? Like leisure activity,
Oh,
you know.
leisure activities. Okay. Um, we well, for instance, Hanukkah. Hanukkah was a lovely time because even though sometimes in the winter we battled the grip, the flu. Almost every winter, my sister and I got sick.
Hmm.
And there were homemade recipes, not recipes, but medications.
Treatments, yeah.
And but we always came through. At one point, I remember I was so sick that I was delirious, and I remember being delirious. So I was fully awake, aware of what was going on.
Hmm.
But we always, these homemade medications, recipes, treatments were very effective. They were slow, but they were effective.
And you were talking about Hanukkah.
Hanukkah was a time when the family got together, and it was focused more on the historic fact, because Hanukkah is not really that kind of a holiday. It's more of a we're celebrating a victory. We're celebrating a miracle. And at that time, of course, I was young enough not to really realize it, except looking forward to some gifts and making some homemade gifts, which we did.
Mm-hmm. And when you said the family got together, were
Yeah.
there other family that you
Well,
had there?
no, not really, because our extended family was in different towns,
Oh, not in Bad Pyrmont.
not in Bad Pyrmont. And so it was just really my grandparents and my parents and my sister and I. And we were upstairs at that time because the guests were gone, and we were on the second floor instead of the third. So everything had to move down, the bedrooms and even a separate little kitchen there. And my grandparents were on the main floor, and they had their own kitchen. And in the summer, I must say that everything moved in different places.
Mm-hmm.
And the main kitchen became a kitchen in the basement with a ranch that was fueled by, I think, wood. I'm not sure.
So when you say the family got together for Hanukkah, you're talking about your immediate family.
The immediate
living there.
family.
And what about other Jewish holidays? Because you referred to Shabbat. So was your family observant?
Oh, very. Yes, I came from a very Orthodox family. And I didn't mention this, but in the summer we had maids, and they were young women from outlying villages who wanted to earn some money. And they would come and be chambermaids. And then we had one or two Jewish girls who wanted to learn the art of kosher cooking. And so they worked in the kitchen. And then we kept one maid from one of the hills. She was not Jewish, over the winter. And she was there to cook for us on a Shabbat or holiday under my grandma's, supervision, of course. Mm-hmm. And she also turned the lights on for us and turned the lights off for us, all the things a strictly Orthodox family does not do on Shabbat. Mm-hmm. And so there was one maid who taught me how to play the harmonica, and
so a lot of other people
she
within
told
the
me
group.
stories,
Yeah.
Yeah, it was very
And
comfortable.
you mentioned that your grandfather was a rabbi. So was
Yes.
he a rabbi in the? Was there there a synagogue in Bad Pyrmont
Well,
that was a center?
he was, I guess, when the, that's just my own idea. I think he was in the congregation when the congregation was a sizable one. When it was later on, when I was there, it had dwindled down to more older people than young people.
Hmm.
And sometimes it was very hard to get a minyan together.
Later on, you're saying. Were when you again when you're
Yes.
growing up was the synagogue kind of a center for the Jewish community or not so
Well,
much?
not really, no. That would be Hamlin, another town of Pied Piper fame.
Yeah.
They were actually had a Zionist group later on
In Hamlin.
in Hamlin,
Okay.
and we went there at one point when they had I think they had a Purim fest, something like that, and we were on the stage. I played the Pied Piper, and I played my flute, my recorder at that time. I didn't have a flute yet,
Mhm.
so
And the were you part of that Zionist group at all, or was your family involved in the
no,
Zionism
no,
at all?
not at that time. It was already getting fractured.
What do you mean fractured?
Well, it was 1933 or 34, and the Nazis had gone into power.
I see.
So it was just barely hanging on.
Okay. So you mentioned earlier that you were not so much aware of the Jews versus non-Jews until you were 9 years old.
I took it as a matter of fact.
Yeah. So what happened around when you were 9 years old that changed things for you?
When I was 9 years old, there was an incident. Like I said, I had a best friend across the street. There was another so called friend, a girl who was down from our street a little way, not, she's practically a neighbor. Her name was Gerda. Gerda was a very, hindsight, I realize now that she was a very envious type of person. And I think she was afraid that I would take Ilse, who was my best friend, away from her. And so she came up one day and we were standing outside just hanging around, Ilse and I, and Gerda came up and she said, she's to me, there is this man and he hates Jews. And that to me was kind of a shock.
Because that's the first time you've had that kind
That's
of a
the
reaction.
first time I ever heard that. And I had no idea what she was talking about. I mean, I was 9 years old, so you know, I had just gone through a very traumatic appendectomy, and I was still very sensitive about things. But it just, I don't know, it just seemed like very strange.
And then how did it affect you in some lasting way, or
I don't know how.
it
That's the
sounds?
first time I really realized that there were some people that hated us.
Well, did that change anything in your friendships?
Well, it seems like there's a great big gap there from that time until Hitler came to power, which was actually in 1933, I think. Dates are not good in my mind.
Mm-hmm.
It was in the early 1930s when we had a general election, and I remember taking my grandmother Tilly to the high school to vote. I went with her. She voted, of course, for Hindenburg, who was the Democratic. That's when Hitler came to power.
So at that time, so how old were you then?
I was
12, maybe?
12, maybe
12,
12,
13.
13.
Um, what, what were people saying about Hitler then?
I think I was 12. Yes.
What were people do? What? How? I'm trying to think about what a 12-year-old would understand. But what did you understand? What were people saying about Hitler at that time? Because it was an election, as you said.
Yes. I think that, I don't know what the Jewish congregation, Jewish people in the town thought. He did make speeches before that. I mean, he was already rearing his head, so to speak, by making these hateful speeches, blaming the Jews for anything under the sun. And I know the economic fact in Germany after the First World War was a terrible, terrible thing. The uh, the war debt that Germany had to pay for the war, because they were the losers, was unreachable. Now, I'm just quoting later history that I read about.
That's looking back, yeah. And
At that time, I didn't know.
At the time, yeah. So what
At
did
that
you
time,
know
I
at the
didn't
time?
know.
What were you aware of at the time? Was your family struggling financially?
Not really. They kind of, I know they listened to some of the speeches on their radio, but I think the census of the majority, I think, said, "Oh, it'll just blow over. It's just something that he needs to have the scapegoat in order to win, and it'll blow over." I mean, after all, they had been used to anti-Semitism in Germany before, but not as vicious and not as openly.
So you believe that your parents listened to some of his speeches? Did you
I can
you believe that your parents listened to some of his speeches? Did you ever hear any of his speeches?
I just heard the ravings. I heard the ravings in his voice, but it didn't really sink in.
Yeah, yeah.
No,
Yeah.
I wasn't aware of it.
And were your parents talking about it much?
I think so. I think they were concerned, but as I said before, I think the general consensus was because we considered ourselves German and Jewish in that order. That's my impression.
First German.
My own impression, and it's hindsight mostly, that we were more German than Jewish, even though we were Orthodox.
Can you say more about that? What that means to you when you say first German?
I can only say something in hindsight when I was more mature. And that would be that we more or less looked down on the Polish Jews or the Russian Jews, because to them, I think it might have been the opposite. The Jewish faith was much more important to them. It was more important that they spoke Hebrew or Yiddish than the native languages. And I think the German people tried to be so integrated into the German life, because for a long time before the First World War, they were not even allowed to serve in the German army or become officers at that point. But they were comfortable because they thought they were safe in their German
Germanness.
Yeah, in their German, in their German life. But there were still a lot of German Jews who were very Orthodox. And my father's brother, who was a chief rabbi, they still talk about him in the high school because he was such a genius.
And so he was very Orthodox as well, your father's brother.
Very, very Orthodox. His wife was Scheitel. And the kids, they had 3 kids. they were brought up Jewish, of course.
But you'd say that they also would have thought of themselves first German, as you would say that they would also have thought of themselves as first German and second
I think
Jewish.
so. I had that. Looking back, I really have that feeling that because a lot of people in Germany said when they found out I was Jewish when I was a little older, they had said to me, "Oh, I thought you were German," and I would say, "Well, I am German, but German is a nationality. Jewish is my religion." They couldn't,
Put them together.
Yeah,
Interesting.
yeah, yeah.
So when Hitler was elected, your family didn't vote for him, but he was elected.
It was what?
You're saying that when Hitler was elected, the feeling in the family was this will blow over. We've dealt with anti-Semitism before. They knew he was an anti-Semite.
Yes.
They knew that was clear.
Yes.
But they figured this will blow over.
Yes.
So when did things start to get seriously bad? What's your
That's
first
awfully
memory
hard to say.
of when you started to feel differently, not safe?
It's very hard to say. I can only say that my own feelings started to change. And it's very weird. I have to tell you, I have to warn you, it's really weird how I felt. I began having panic attacks. That's when I felt that things were really serious. I was having panic attacks. I was having anxiety attacks.
Can you describe that?
Pardon?
Can you describe what that felt like?
Yes, I can, because I've had it all my life. It was a feeling, the urge to run away, was so strong. But I knew that I couldn't run anywhere. There was nowhere to run. Then my home became my safe place. But you see, I was apprenticed at that time. My parents, that's how it started, I think. Well, no, it started before that. Then my parents got a letter from the high school. At that time, I was in my third year of high school. And
So how old would you have been then? About
14, 15.
Okay.
No, I might have been. No, I might have been a little older. Not sure.
But 14,
Anyway,
15,
I was
something.
a teenager.
Yeah.
And then that started with.
You said they got a letter from the high school.
I had the urge to run. Where to? I have no idea. It was so strong that I remember coming home from my apprenticeship in this little town, and I had to go to a trade school that was part of my apprenticeship.
This was part of your high school?
No,
that was after
I couldn't go there anymore.
So
my parents got a letter that
let's go
I
back
was
to that.
not supposed to go anymore.
Okay, let's go back to that. Your parents got a letter when you were 14 or 15.
Probably around 15, I would say, or maybe.
That you're not supposed to come back to the high school. And what was that about?
Well, that was the. Well, before that, I had already had several episodes of that, a feeling that, I don't know, that's a very hard thing for me to think about.
Well, maybe
okay, I was not in school anymore.
Yeah, so I'd like to understand a little bit about how things changed in your life in your
Well,
daily
that's
life.
what I'm talking about.
And it was before they told you should not come back to the high school. Things were starting to change,
I think it was during that time
and things was
afterwards.
changing in the town. There were more rules, more laws about Jews. Is that right?
Well, we had to assemble every morning and sing that horse whistle thing. It's a national anthem. They decreed, they took the old one and made it a secondary anthem. First, we had to sing this thing, that was written during the Berlin street fights by a Nazi, okay, um, uh, extolling this wonderful thing about the camaraderie and the people who were killed in those street fights. All those people, they were made heroes of Nazism, and and Horst Wessel was one of those who died in one of those street fights. So he became the hero of the song that he wrote.
This
And
was
then we had to, of course, the High Little
this was at school. You're talking
in the
about
school,
in the
like
school.
this. And then we had to sing.
Wow.
And then after that, we sang the nice old German song, that is so misinterpreted. Germany, Germany above all,
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
Deutschland.
Well,
Deutschland
it was a
über alles.
different meaning, but it was not, it was interpreted wrongly afterwards.
So it sounds like that you were aware enough about Nazism and the anti-Semitism
Very much so.
that when
Yeah.
you had to do that, that was
We
difficult.
had to do that. I couldn't be singled out. I had to go to the torch parades and watch the book burnings.
So tell me some about that. This
Well,
was
we
again
were
while you were
forced-
still in high school, right?
I was still in school. And when you're in school, you do what the teachers tell you, you do what your parents never said you can't go. And I don't know what would have happened if I would have refused to go. You do things to try to not pay attention to yourself. And it got to such an extreme with me that I thought that maybe I was dreaming all this, that nothing was real, which scared the heck out of me. It produced a symptom. I hate to tell you this because it sounds crazy. Out of body experience. I would walk along the street and then I would get a funny feeling. Oh, this is not me anymore. This is not me anymore. I'm invisible. Scared the heck out of me. That produced the anxieties and the panic attacks. First, this out-of-body experience, then the other thing. So my parents didn't know what to do about it. I would cling to my father for protection, cling to him. And all he could do was hold me. That's all. My mother, on the other hand, was much more realistic. She said to me, "Stop that nonsense." And because she was so, disciplinarian, I snapped out of it. But my father was more sympathetic.
So you mentioned that when you were in school that you were kind of forced, or you had to go to see things that were very difficult to see. And you mentioned the book burnings. Can you tell me what you saw when you went to the book burning?
Well, I didn't realize the significance of that at all. It was just almost like a show. It was like they were throwing books into the flames. The guys with those hideous brown uniforms were throwing things in the flames. And we had a torch parade up to that square that I told you that was so beautiful. They had a fire going in the middle of it because it was all beautiful. What do you call it? The floor was always renewed every summer with beautiful marble chips. Like we used to go there and pick up marble chips that had a little gold in it, just for the fun of it, you know.
So it was a beautiful place, and then you had torch
It's
parades.
just beautiful, beautiful childhood. And yes, so my idea was, it didn't sink in. They were burning the books of Jewish poets, Jewish writers like Thomas Mann, the poet Heine. I had read some of those books actually already because I like poetry and I write poetry. And when I'm stressed, I write poetry.
So it didn't sink in that this was about Jews, but it was a
Oh
very...
yeah, oh
it did.
definitely.
it did. I'm
The
sorry.
guys were, the men had their uniforms on. Oh yeah, definitely.
It sounds like a very, very scary experience.
Very scary. It was pitch dark. Oh, there were streetlights, of course, but they weren't all that, bright as they are nowadays, modern. The thing is, our Jewish doctor, was a very good doctor, recommended to my parents they should send me to this house that the woman took in children who were disturbed, regardless of religion or whatever. And yet, of course, my parents had to pay. And he wanted me to go into this, I don't know why, because it really didn't help. It really didn't.
This was because of your anxiety, because of the panic?
Pardon?
He was doing that because of the anxiety?
Yes. Yes, because there were no pills like today. The only thing there was bromide, which was a horrible thing, liquid that, you took by mouth. And it wasn't as effective as today's pills. Mm-hmm. No, he wanted to do that because he knew that the woman who ran the place, it was a beautiful little villa, was an expert in handling children. Now, I don't know what kind of a person she was. I know she had one little girl there who had, what's that? It's called, she had the bulging eyes.
Like thyroid problems?
No, little girl. No.
But she was there with some other problems.
A mental thing. Not,
She was there with some other medical problems. So
she was there, and there was another girl in my bedroom with her. We were just the two girls in one room, and I used to get a panic attack in the middle of the night, and I'd get out of my bed and go in her bed. And she would just lay there and comfort me in a way, just kind of put your arms around me.
And this was all so this was happening?
That was all during that time.
And you were still this was before you had to leave school, or you were still in? This was before you had to leave school, or were you still in school?
No, I was not in school anymore.
So you started to develop this anxiety. You had to go to school and do Heil Hitler and sing songs praising Nazis.
Well, actually, I was still in school when the book burnings
and the
occurred.
Book burning. Because then they told your parents that you couldn't stay in school. Was that because of the anxiety?
No, because I was Jewish.
That's because you were Jewish.
Yes.
So that was the point when Jewish kids no longer could go to school, to regular school.
Also, very important. Every summer, when we had summer vacation in school, I would go home. I would put my bathing suit, my swimsuit on, because swimming was my sport. And I actually had to take a test, the breaststroke for 20 minutes this way, 20 minutes that way, and then I got a diploma. That was how I started, when I started to get really athletic. And my specialty was the broad jump. I would take a running leap and go into a sandbox, and then they would measure where I lit up, lit up when where I stopped, and that too I got a diploma. At that time, we had mini Olympics in school too, and I was very good at it. I got another diploma, and that diploma had swastikas all over it, and I destroyed it. When I knew I was going to leave the country, I took it and I burned it. I didn't want to get caught at the border, because we heard some very bad stories what happened at the border.
So after you didn't go to school,
I didn't go to school
and you
anymore.
were dealing with this anxiety.
The anxiety.
And these out-of-body experiences, very, very scary.
Yeah.
What happened then? You referred to being apprenticed. So what happened in that time? It was a couple of years in there.
Well, then I was apprenticed to the dressmaker because my mother didn't want me to. First of all, she shipped me off to Hanover to my aunt, my mother's oldest sister, who was a housekeeper for a doctor. And I lived there for over a year. And it was okay because nobody knew me. I made new friends. And it was okay. I was all right with that. But eventually, and we could go back and forth every few weekends. The doctor had a car, and he would take my aunt and me back to Bad Pyrmont to see my parents. So that was fine.
So you weren't feeling as scared during
At that time, it was pretty good.
Okay.
And of course, then the night of the broken glass happened.
So tell me about that.
At that time, I was home. We were sleeping. My sister and I shared a bedroom. She had a bed, I had a bed, and everybody had gone to sleep. My parents apparently woke up because our neighbors were Jewish. They had a business. They made umbrellas. He had a little factory in the back of his house. It was a family thing. And the father there were two children, but they were adult children, still living at home, a boy and a woman and a man. And they had they had a big house, really big. It's not there anymore, but it was really big. And in front of the house was a built-in showcase with the umbrellas and the parasols for the, for the sun,
Mm-hmm.
And they heard a commotion. My parents heard a commotion about 2:00 in the morning, okay? It was November 9th, going on to it was November 10th, really, because it's 2:00 in the morning. I know all this because my mother told me that was the time.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't have a watch. They apparently heard a commotion next door, the sound of broken glass, hollering, loud voices, and screams and whatever. And my father and mother got up. My father put on his clothes over his pajamas. He didn't even have time to, put anything else on. And my mother had a nightgown on. She put a coat over that. And they went in our hall, turned the light on in the hall. And my grandmother was sleeping. She, my grandfather had passed away a long time before that. So my grandmother was in her 80s. She was sleeping. She never heard a thing. So I heard something in our hall, and I saw a light in the hall. And I got out of bed. I had my pajamas on. I opened my bedroom door just a crack, and I saw my parents standing in front of the hall. Apparently, these men had broken in. And at that time, we were renting. We no longer had that hotel.
Oh.
We had to give it up. That's another thing that happened.
You had to
So
give it up because of
we
the
gave it
laws?
up because we weren't allowed to have any more business. And they had a sign there on one of our balconies that was a black sign with some big yellow circles that signified Jews were there. They had to give it up.
So now you
The
were renting.
Nuremberg laws stated that Jews could not own a business anymore. Okay, so it wasn't just the boycotts. After that came that law.
Mhm.
Little by little, they choked it. They choked everything off. And so
So you were renting this place now, and you saw your parents in the hall.
yeah, I looked, and they were confronting 3 or 4 men in that hideous uniform with their things on and their armbands with the swastika. And they carried they weren't 2x4s. It was wood, but it was heavy sticks like. And my mother looked around and she saw me and she said, "Lotta, go to bed." Just like that. Very, very, go to bed. She was scared to death, I think.
I'm sure.
I was a good-looking girl.
Oh.
It was my father used to pick me up from the railroad station after after I had been to trade school. He was scared. It was a long walk to our house, and he didn't want me to be alone. So she was scared, but God knows what they were going to do. And then and then I went to bed. My sister I don't know if she was awake or not, but she was in bed. I went in my bed, and Paula, I have never experienced the kind of fear that I had. It was like my life. I'm not going to live through this. My teeth were like that. I couldn't stop. I was shaking like that. I still remember that. I could not stop. I had never, ever experienced a scare like that. And all of a sudden, everything went quiet. The light went out, quiet. I looked and everybody was gone.
Your parents were gone.
My mother and father were gone, and those men were gone. And I didn't know what, they were gone. That's when it happened. That's when I went to bed and I couldn't, My mother, okay, so my grandmother slept through the whole thing because she was in a different room. So she probably didn't hear anything.
So you were alone there with your sister. Well, you knew your grandmother was downstairs, but you were alone with your sister.
It was the weekend. I remember that much. It was either the Saturday or the Sunday of November the 10th. November the 10th was the dawn, okay? And we were alone with my grandmother. And before I could really do anything or say anything, my mother came back. My father didn't.
Must have been a relief, though, to see your mother.
Well, it was, but my mother was, when I tell you that she looked different, She was like, she did have hair that was dark and sort of salt and pepper. There was more gray than anything else. She came back from jail. They took everybody to the jail. Okay, everybody. Everybody they rounded up. My mother came back. She didn't say very much. She said she wanted to go to the Quaker house. Now, I didn't mention the Quakers. They had only 2 meeting houses in all of Germany, and one of them was in our town. And it was such a lucky thing because they would do anything to help people, whether friend or foe, didn't matter. When they needed help, the Quakers were there. They bought us groceries. They gave us hope. So my mother wanted to go to the Quaker house, and she said to me, Lotta, would you go with me? And I said, sure. When we went up there, we went up a steep hill. The street was very steep. And my mother had a heart condition. When we reached the street up that hill, there was another street running that way, right to the Quaker house, the meeting house. But you had to pass the Jewish cemetery. And when we did, I thought my mother was having a heart attack because it was totally destroyed. All the tombstones were down. There were no visible place of a cemetery, just the fallen tombstones and a few bushes, and that was it. And when my mother saw that, I thought she was really having, it was bad. So I took her arm, and we went into the Quaker house, and there they calmed us down, because I was a wreck too. I hadn't slept all night. And they gave us hope somehow. They said, the woman was English, so she was an English person. Her husband was German, but he was no Nazi, of course. No Nazi whatsoever. He's a Quaker.
Remember their names by any chance?
The names?
Yeah.
Sure. Mr. and Mrs. Frederick. Okay. Frederick. Their only daughter, Brenda, was brought up in England. And later on, I met her here in Pennsylvania at a retreat.
Wow.
Yeah.
So how did they give you hope?
They said, well, the woman, Mrs. Frederick, talked to me, and she said to me, Lottie, someday you will look at this as a nightmare, a bad dream. At that time, it didn't mean all that much, Paula, it was never a nightmare. It was very real all the time, especially when I had those. Just recently, my doctor said it was definitely stress.
PTSD.
Traumatic stress.
Right, post-traumatic stress.
Yes, stress.
But she was trying to help you feel like this will pass.
Well, she understood because she said she had another patient.
No. I mean, Mrs. Friedrich or Frederick. In the Quakers, she was telling you that it'll be like a dream because she was trying to help you feel calmer, I guess.
And she was the one who was very successful getting our doctor and his family to England. She did not have to help us because we were already in touch with people in Sweden who were I don't know how, but were related somehow in a sort of a convoluted type of relationship. I think dating back to my grandmother. They were a very prominent family in Stockholm. And Siri Ashberg was actually the daughter of, I think, a cousin of my grandmother's, something like that. I
These are the
don't know.
people in Sweden.
They were willing to help us get to Sweden.
Hmm.
They had a lot of influence at the royal Swedish court. And so they were able to get us visas to come to Sweden. Because although we had our relatives here who were waiting for us, actually, but at that time, you had to have a quota number.
Right, right. I want to ask you about getting to Sweden, but I'd like to go back to the night with Kristallnacht with the
Yes.
Quaker
So
family.
anyway, what happened at the as a consequence of later on, we of course found out the reason, if you can call it that, for that pogrom. But that's much later.
Yeah. So that night you went to the Quakers for some protection.
Right.
Is that what that was?
Well, they couldn't protect us, of course,
No.
but they could encourage us to have some hope that things that we could get out or something, that we would get help. Mm-hmm. Even if we didn't have help already, they could help us. So my mother got calmed down. I got calmed down. We went back home, and they proceeded to help us. She actually proceeded to help us with groceries, getting groceries, and just existing really. Mm-hmm. We waited for our visas.
But now your father was in jail all this time?
No, my father was taken to a point in Hanover where they were assembled. A mass gathering of the Jews in that whole district. There was an assembly point for all the Jews being together, mostly men or young men. In Hanover, and there was one point where I don't know where, but from there they were deported to Buchenwald, mm-hmm. which was a concentration camp.
So your father was deported to Buchenwald?
Oh yeah, all of them, except the doctor. The doctor they let go. His father they let go. They returned home. The doctor, that's a totally different story. He was they named a street after him after the war. He was a very good doctor. Not only that, but he would treat anybody, whether they could pay or not.
Mm-hmm. So when did you learn that your father was deported to Buchenwald?
Well, we didn't hear anything from him for about, I would say, over a week. And then we had a postcard, a pre-printed postcard, that he was in Buchenwald. And that's all it said. Wow. And then my mother found out that my mother went to the police station because the jail was right next to it anyway. She went to the police station and she found out after a while if she could find his honorable discharge from the First World War, if she could find a decoration. We knew, or she knew rather, that he had the Iron Cross First Class as a decoration when he was discharged, but she didn't know what it was. So she turned the house upside down. She finally found it. She brought it back to the police station. What they did, I don't know. But after over a month, my father was released. Wow. He didn't come home. My mother went to meet him in Hanover, the big town, where there was one Jewish hospital still operating. My father went there. They took his clothes off because there was no way he ever could shave or wash himself. There was nothing hygiene at all. And of course, he had his pajamas under his clothes still after all that time. They burned them. They burned the clothes. My mother took, she was told to bring underwear and a suit for him. And it was cold out there already in November. She said, when my mother came home, I forgot to tell you this. My mother came home that morning after being in jail all night. She told me, would I go with her? Well, first I think we went to the Quakers. And then she wanted me to go and, no, first we went to the Quakers. Then we came home. Then she said to me, would you take your bicycle and go to the doctor's house and see if you can talk to somebody there, see what happened. Maybe we can find out where Dad went. She didn't know. Nobody knew.
Just disappeared. Yeah.
And so I took my bicycle. And Paula, to this day in the fall, when the leaves come down, I think of that crunchy feeling with the leaves, with my bicycle wheels. They were crunching those leaves. I could still hear that. Wow. There wasn't a soul around. It was Sunday morning, not a soul. It's almost like a dead town. And I went to the doctor's house, but nobody wanted to answer. And I can't blame them. They were probably so scared. They didn't know who was at the door. Mm-hmm. So I went back home and I said, I'm sorry, Mom, but I couldn't. Nobody was answering.
And what was it like when your father came home? I mean, for the first week, you didn't even know where he was. Then you find out he's been deported to Buchenwald.
Yeah.
He's in Buchenwald for a month.
Right. Well, by that time it was almost Hanukkah. And of course there was there was nothing really. We couldn't do anything. That's when the Sisters of St. Joseph's, they did have a mother house in our town, which was another lucky thing for us because that is an order who also helps you. I think it's a teaching order, and they're Catholic nuns, and the mother house was there in the park, and they invited my sister and me and the doctor's two girls for a Hanukkah thing. Now, they were Catholic. They wanted us to have a little Hanukkah celebration. I do remember going to the mother house. And they had hot chocolate, they had cookies. And, it was just something took us out of our house where everybody was so down,
Mm-hmm. They wanted you to have some
they wanted
pleasure.
us to have something to remember.
Yeah.
And I did remember, because when I came over here, I tried to, I got married, I brought up my family, blah, blah, everything was so busy. But after that, I looked them up and I told them that I wanted to acknowledge what they did, how they helped us in Germany. Yeah. So I went to their mother house. I was invited to have a lunch there and bring my album, and yeah.
Wonderful.
Yeah, it's wonderful. So, to this day, I'm a friend of one of the nuns. We always, she sends Hanukkah cards to me. I send Christmas cards to her,
That's nice. So your family, when your father came home, you're saying that even before Kristallnacht, you were already looking into leaving, to getting away. You knew how bad it was.
Right.
And you had made connections to
Christmas. Well, actually, I think, Paula, I'm sorry, I don't want to interrupt you.
No, go ahead.
I think maybe that speeded up the fact that we could go to Sweden. Mm-hmm. that really, you know,
Like you couldn't get into
would
America
speed
then, but you
everything
could get to
up.
Sweden.
The minute my father came home with was probably either the middle, I guess it was the middle of January. And it was decided between my parents that I would go with my father, that my mother, my grandmother, and my sister would stay behind and pack up what was left. Everything was already sold under duress, I might say. The
You were
furniture,
forced to sell things.
the furniture, the
Yeah.
china, whatever. My mother's beautiful crystal, everything was, given away or sold. Um,
And you were going to go with your father.
I was supposed to go with my father. So on the morning of our departure, my father had the foresight of giving the police, because he had to tell the police that you were leaving.
Oh.
He told the police, gave him a different date, 2 days ahead. And we left 2 days before that date because he was still afraid that he would be held back. And so we didn't, of course, nobody had a car in those days. They didn't even drive. We had to walk about a quarter of a mile down to the depot.
The
And
train
I still
station?
remember that night.
Gesundheit.
Excuse me. Thank you. That night, pitch dark, no street lights down there. It was sort of out of town. And that depot is still standing the way it was then. Even the inside, the tiles on the wall are still the same. After some 60 years.
You mean when you went back, you saw that it was
When
the
I
same?
went back,
Yeah.
it wasn't a very good feeling.
Yeah, yeah.
So we left. We went. He woke me up around 1 o'clock. He carried a little satchel. I had a little suitcase. We carried it down to the station. Nobody bothered us. It was very quiet, of course. And we took the train to Hamburg. I think we had to, yeah. Hamburg was the border. That's where you get the ferry to Sweden, to Göteborg. And from there you take the train to Stockholm. And so we took that. We got away with that.
So what was that trip like for you? Were you I mean, what was that trip like for you? Were you afraid? Were you excited? Were you
No, I was
sad?
not excited. I was scared. I was scared. I was still in Germany.
Yeah.
We stopped at the border and had to leave the train. There was a border guard. There were border guards. Now, this was before we got to Hamburg. So what happened was they took my father away from me, okay? I was left on the station, somewhere in the middle of nowhere, I think. I was left on this station, and the train took off, and my father was gone, and I got scared, and I had this nice little ring that my American relatives had given me, a little green, what do you call that, clear emerald ring with some diamonds set all around it. I got so scared that something they might, because I had heard some horror stories where somebody's mother had sewn diamonds into her son's coat, and they found him, and that was the end of the man. They never saw their son again. So I was thinking, my God, what am I going to do? In the meantime, a train came. I took the ring off and I threw it down under the train. That's how scared I was.
Who took your father away?
The border guards.
Oh.
And I guess somebody told me, I think it must have been my father, he had to strip right down to nothing. They inspected every opening in his body.
to make sure he wasn't taking anything of any value.
Yeah.
Oh.
Concealing something of value. So when they, oh, and my father had bought me a book to read, a German book to read on the way. They took that book and they kept shaking and seeing if the pages were glued together or something. Yeah. Yeah. Very thorough.
And then they
They
didn't
let
find
him go.
anything,
Yeah.
and they let
And
him
then we
go.
took the train to Hamburg. And in Hamburg, my father had a cousin that I had never met. And he kind of came to say goodbye to us because I don't think he ever made it. He and his family, I don't think ever made it out. He was a cousin on my grandfather's side. So then we got on the ferry and we had a very rough crossing, but
That you got to safety.
it was freedom, you
Yeah.
know.
And your mother and your sister?
My mother, my sister, and my grandmother
grandmother.
came a month later. Now, they had to do the packing, but they couldn't do it without a Nazi official being there to watch them pack. Okay? He was sitting there watching them. And I don't know what happened, but my mother said that my Aunt Ella, who was the oldest sister of my mother, came to help her pack. And my mother had a sewing box that opened up and closed this way, that when it was opened, and the guy apparently wasn't looking, my aunt threw a ring, and she had beautiful jewelry. I mean, something, no cheap stuff, a gold charm bracelet with charms, and a big ring, aquamarine, set in what do you call that again? Not white gold, platinum.
Platinum.
Through the sewing box. My mother didn't see it. The guy didn't see it. She found it later on in New York Harbor when she opened, not New York Harbor, Rochester, when she opened up the box.
So it got all the way from Germany into Sweden, but you didn't see it
She
till
never
Rochester.
saw her sister again.
Wow.
Yeah.
So I've asked you a lot of questions about your life in Germany, and I so appreciate what you've shared. I'm going to be asking you questions about Sweden and then the United States. Is there anything else about your life in Germany that we didn't touch on that you want to share?
Well, it's just the people that I lost that are still on my mind. I know when November 10th, November 9th, that night, I'm a wreck. I'm just, that's my Memorial Day. I remember all those people.
Who are the people you'd like to remember?
Pardon?
Who are the people? Are there some names of some
They
people
are
you
all
want
on
to
my
share?
mother's side mostly.
Tell me
On
that.
my father's side, we had relatives here that were born in America, and they helped us, especially those two sisters right here in Rochester. That's why we came to Rochester.
Mm-hmm.
They were at the harbor in New York City when we landed.
Who are the people on your mother's side that you want to name
All
or
her
remember?
siblings and their children, who are all gone.
And that would be the Frozen. Was your mother's maiden name Frozen?
Frozen.
Frozen.
Well, not all of them, because the youngest daughter was a Landesmann, okay?
Mm-hmm.
Sophie Landesmann and her husband Max and her son Kurt, who was my favorite nephew, cousin. And this little baby who was only 4 years old when everything was lost.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. All those people on my mother's side, all her siblings are gone.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know how she could even, face it.
Okay. So you were talking about the train from Germany and then the ferry to Sweden. And you said that you went to Sweden because you had cousins there. Is that right?
No,
Some
they're not
relatives?
cousins. I really don't know what the relationship is. I think maybe way back with my grandmother, something, my
Do you,
father's mother. I
what
think
were their names?
Ashberg,
Okay.
Ashberg,
Ashberg. Okay.
yes. He was a banker. And Siri Ashberg was, through her mother, was somehow related to my grandmother, I think. They had a house in Bad Pyrmont. And when one summer when her Siri's son was little, they came to visit. They lived in that house that they had right at the beginning, the entrance of the park, and the house is still there. There's a restaurant in the bottom of it, but they had beautiful antique furniture,
Hmm. And so
and they were all ruined
they were
by.
Germans who lived in Sweden, or they were Swedes who had a house in Germany?
They were Swedish, and they
Swedish.
had a house in
Okay.
Germany. She was actually she and her mother. They were German at one point, but she had married a Swedish Jewish man,
I see.
and they were very wealthy, and
And they met you at the ferry?
they were
They met you at the ferry?
no, they met from Göteborg. The ferry went only to Göteborg, and then we took the train to Stockholm, and they met Ziri. I never met her husband ever. They had an office in Stockholm, and I met the people, the two women who were the secretaries, and so every transaction was through them. We hardly ever met Siri and her husband. They kept separate. But I met their son, who was only 9 years old at that time.
And when you were in Sweden, it was always the plan to come to the United States.
Oh, yeah.
You were waiting
We were
essentially.
just waiting. We couldn't wait in Germany anymore, so we waited for our. The consulate eventually informed us that our visas were ready, and that's when we went to Norway. Because my father said we couldn't get a Swedish ship. We had to wait a whole month for that. It was 1940. The world was still at war. America had gone into the war, and there was always a danger of submarines in the North Sea and also in the Atlantic, which we had to cross. We could not go through the English Channel because during the war that was already mined, so the ship could not go there. We got a small Norwegian ship, and because Norway and Sweden were neutral countries, so we thought, we would be safe.
And did you feel safe in Sweden?
Well, we did only for a little while because we went to Oslo, Norway, and in the meantime, my grandmother had died in Sweden.
Oh.
Yeah, we couldn't take her.
That
She's
was
buried
difficult.
in Sweden.
That was difficult for you.
Very difficult, very. I think the woman was brokenhearted. She could not be next to her husband, which was, the end for her. And our cousins here were awfully disappointed because they loved her. My grandma was their mother's sister, the youngest sister. That's
So
why they always came to visit her.
Yeah. And you were in touch with your cousins here as you were waiting for your visas and.
They were waiting, yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So the trip over was also must have been frightening if you're worried about, you know,
Well,
bombs and.
not at first, because since we couldn't use the English Channel, we had to go up the coast of Norway to all those beautiful fjords, all the way up over the tip of Scotland to get into the Atlantic. And I think it was on a Sunday, I think it was on a Saturday when we arrived, the ship arrived at the last harbor in Oslo, which was Bergen, and we saw two huge German freighters. They looked like freighters anyway. They were huge. And they had the swastika painted on them, no name, and not a soul on board. And that was on Saturday. On Sunday, there was no bulletin on the bulletin board on our boat. Monday morning, we saw a lot of people standing by the bulletin board. And by that time, we had left the harbor. We were on our way to the Atlantic. And so my father went to look what they were looking at. And that night, I think it was, they had invaded Norway at that point. And I think that they had the troops in those ships. That's what I
So
think.
you got out from Norway just before the Nazis
I don't know. There was a
invaded.
lot of mysterious things going on.
Okay.
There was a man on board. As soon as we left the last Bergen, that last harbor, he went on board and he went on deck and he had a hanky, a big white hanky, okay? Just waving it and waving it, and we were thinking, what the heck is he waving at? Somebody must have asked him, because he said he had a brother at a lighthouse up there and he was waving to him. We think he was a spy. Because, Quisling was the one who was the spy who arranged for that raid. I mean, it wasn't a raid, it was an invasion. So our captain, when we got into the Atlantic, our captain took the Norwegian flag up. So now we are traveling without a flag altogether, which was just as bad.
Because he took
Because
it off.
Norway was
Now
invaded
by the Nazis, yeah.
So I think the only other incident I remember was we were already in American waters, but we couldn't see any land yet. When a submarine, I was on deck, I saw it, a submarine came up. That was so weird. And there was nobody on board, but the thing turned around all around the ship, okay? But there was no flag or anything. It could have been any kind of ship, right? And it went back under. Never found out what it was. Left us alone. There was a very tense moment.
I bet.
Oh, what happened now? Oh, that wasn't. Oh,
We'll just do it now. Okay.
not there.
No,
Okay.
No.
Go ahead.
So you're on the ship. You're in American waters. What was it like landing in the United States?
It was exciting. It was different. It used to be that you had to go to Ellis Island, but that was closed up. That was no longer in use. The doctor came on the ship and examined the passengers. He held back one young man who had a sore throat. I don't know what happened to him. We don't know. And then we just were left to go on, and met our cousins, my father's cousins.
These are your father's cousins from Rochester.
Hmm?
These are your father's cousins from Rochester.
Yes,
From Rochester.
they are the two sisters.
Okay. And so
Yeah.
you came directly to Rochester, where you've lived.
Well, we met some
Since.
relatives in New York at the hotel. They took us to a hotel for the night, and they took us out to eat. And I had my first ice cream, maple walnut ice cream.
Was it good?
Oh, it was heaven. Yeah.
Did you feel safe here?
Hmm?
Did you finally feel safe?
Well, we did feel safe when I got to Sweden.
Mm-hmm.
But then again, with that other thing, when we
Right.
on our way to America, that was a little bit tense.
Right. So tell me about life in Rochester. I know you met your husband here.
Yes.
So tell me about that. You came to Rochester.
Yes.
With your,
Well,
now
let's
it's
see.
you, your mother, your father, and your sister.
Right.
Your grandmother had passed away in Sweden.
My grandmother, yes.
Right.
We lived they took us to, well, first of all, they took a taxi because neither one of them drove in those days. We took a taxi. I have to tell you something about this dream I had when I was about 18 years old. It was still Germany. I had a dream that I was going down a road in a car, and there were big old trees on either side of the road, and then we came to a crossroads, and there was a strip of grass in the middle of the road going all the way down the road, and they had some beautiful trees on there with big, big flowers, white and pink flowers. And so there was a dream, and I was 18 years old. This is moving forward now, and we are going down Park Avenue to my cousin's place. They rented rooms at a house on Oxford Street. Okay, so we were going there right from a restaurant where we had breakfast. That was my first American breakfast. So we're going down Park Avenue, and I noticed those beautiful old trees on each side. And all of a sudden, and then there were two big buildings, one on each side. They were like brick. Okay, well, I see the two brick buildings, and I'm already pinching myself. This is not real. This is my dream. Okay, we turn into Oxford Street, and Oxford Street has a strip of grass that runs in the middle. So you have Oxford Street here, Oxford Street there, and in the middle is that dividing line. It's all lawn and the big tulip trees. Those big magnolias, I think they are, or something.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's where their house is, where they had rooms. Mm-hmm. And boy, was I pinching myself. This can't be real. Talking about a, what do you call it?
I don't know, an omen? Or
Yeah, a dream.
A dream. So when you came to Rochester, the four of you, how did you meet your husband?
Pardon?
How did you meet your husband?
Oh, well, I had boyfriends almost right from the get-go. I had a boyfriend right from the get-go. And then I had another boyfriend. And then I had another one. And then this last one was very serious with me. Well, they all were, but I wasn't. I wasn't ready. No, I'm sorry, I wasn't ready. Well, there was a kosher restaurant on Joseph Avenue, which was all Jewish. Joseph Avenue had all these different stores, delicatessens, and two restaurants. And this kosher restaurant, Cohen's, was well known even in New York City. They were known for their special. Cohen's special was a, what do you call it?
It's okay. Doesn't it?
Oh, gee.
It's okay. They had
Yeah,
some
it
special.
does. Yeah, it's meat. It's
Oh,
it's
like pastrami or
no, it's that
it,
beef.
okay.
Okay, it was a kosher. It was a special on rye with two pickles and some potato chips, and they were even known in New York City as the best corned beef
Corned beef.
sandwich. This thick, sliced real fine, but this thick. And so after, let's see, I was going to citizen school, night school on Joseph Avenue. And afterwards, we would stop by one of those kosher restaurants for a snack. And my boyfriend had picked me up. Nobody had a car, so we took the bus home. Anyway, while we were at this other restaurant with those Foxes, kosher restaurant, my husband walked in with a girl, and he was the most handsome thing you ever want to see. He looked like a movie star. He had a coat, a navy coat, long coat on, and a yellow scarf. And boy, was he handsome. Oh, God. He took a look at me, and he kept looking at me. But he was with this other girl, and eventually, they came to the table where I was sitting with my boyfriend and my girlfriend. Okay. And so, I don't know did they introduce themselves? I guess they did. Now, I knew this girl from somewhere where she worked, I guess. And what happened was my boyfriend got up to do something, and my husband came over to the table, and he wanted to get my phone number. He wanted to know my phone number, and I wouldn't give it to him. I said, he's got a lot of nerve. He knows I'm with another boy, So what happened was he took the bus with this girl. He was taking the girl home. It wasn't his girlfriend. It was just a friend. And my girlfriend took the same bus. So he got the phone number from her.
And that was the beginning of a long
That was the
relationship.
beginning.
How long were you married?
45 years.
Wow. What did your husband do?
He worked at Cohen's restaurant.
Oh, he worked
He
at
had just come out of the service. He was just, got his honorable discharge. He spent 9 months in an army hospital because he got injured on maneuvers. He broke every tendon in his knee, and he was in a cast for a long time. And then when he came out, he got an honorable discharge, and he wanted to go to Germany in the worst place because his regiment was going to Germany. He wanted to find out what happened to his parents, but he never,
Because he was
never
German
went.
as well, your husband, yes?
Pardon?
He was German also, your husband?
Oh, sure, yeah.
Yeah.
He came from the Rhineland, yeah.
So when did he come to the United States?
In 1936, he was 16 years old.
I see.
Yeah.
And how old were you when you got married then?
I was 22, I think. Yeah.
And what did he do after he worked at Cohen's? I'm assuming that wasn't his career, so...
He worked at Cohen's for over 20 years.
Oh, wow.
Yes. Yes.
So he was a
Yeah.
serious Cohen's guy.
Yeah.
And you had children.
I have 2 children, yes.
And when were they born and what are their names?
Well, Michael was born in 1947, and Gail was born in 1954. So it's a long interval. I had a couple of miscarriages,
And you have grandchildren.
Oh, yes, I have 2 grandsons and 1 great-grandson.
What are their names?
Bradley Borum. I think you have the spelling.
Yeah.
Yeah, and Mark Borum.
Are your grandsons?
My grandson is Jacob.
That's your great grandson.
Pardon?
Jacob is your great grandson. Is that right?
My great
Great
grandson,
grandson.
yes.
Yeah, yeah.
He's the one with that skull and crossbones sweater. That's what he wanted, so I made him one.
Have you ever talked about your? I think you have. Have you ever talked about your experiences with your children and your grandchildren?
Not really, not in detail. That's why I had that album.
Yeah, we're going to
You
look
know,
at that.
it's easier with that because I figured when they're young, it doesn't really think. I did talk in the schools. Okay, I do have to mention that. I had a commitment, more or less, to tell of my experiences in the high schools only, because I figured at that time young people are old enough to understand what I'm talking about. It's all part of history.
And what was the reaction from the high school students?
Very good, always a very good reaction. Yes.
Meaning what? Like what would they ask you questions or?
Well, I had some written things that the high school over here in Irondequoit was putting on a play of Anne Frank, and they wanted to know. They came. Some of the actors in it came over here to see if I could tell them what a teenager would feel like if they were hidden. You know. Well, I could only talk from my own experience, really. But they did send me a very nice invitation to come and see the play, which I didn't. And I've had always very good responses.
I guess my other questions are, well, I forgot to ask you this. Have you worked outside of the home in Rochester? Or
Not really.
You were home with
Well,
your
I
children?
did. I did during the war, but I couldn't walk in the fence because I wasn't a citizen yet.
Right.
But I did find a place where they were making aerial cameras, and I was an inspector there.
So when you were here in Rochester as the war was progressing and you were starting to hear what was happening, of course you had a big family there on your mother's side in particular. What was that like for the family? What was that like?
Well,
As the war was progressing and you knew what was going on, like what was it like for your family here?
Well, it was good. It was my father couldn't wait to be a citizen. He took out first papers 2 weeks after we got here, and 5 years later, almost to the day, we became citizens. My sister was still under my parents because she was a minor, but I became a citizen. And actually, I was looking for a picture of me in the local newspaper where I'm standing with the little American flag. Couldn't find it. Yeah, unfortunately. But I have a copy of my citizenship papers in their album. Yeah.
So my other questions are really about how this has affected you through the years. Like, sometimes when people go through things like this, they become bitter or angry. It affects how you see people, other people, or maybe even the German people. How do you think this has affected you over your life? It's a very broad question, I know, but
for a long time after I got here, and even after I became a citizen, I hesitated very much to tell everybody I was Jewish. Always afraid of the repercussions. They may not like me, they may not be a friend, things like that. And it shouldn't have been that way because the people that I was close to, I had a girlfriend who was, I met her so long ago. She was a friend for over 50 years, and she was just as broad-minded as anybody could be.
Mhm.
I shouldn't have been afraid, but for a long time I was. Now I don't hesitate anymore. You know, that's who I am.
Why did you choose now to tell to tell your story? Why are you telling this story now for this project?
My main reason is that there are people who deny that it ever happened. I want to be a witness of something that did happen. That's one reason. Another reason is that I want to be the one who talks for the people who never had a chance to speak up, my own relatives. I don't want to, there is a nephew of mine, my sister's oldest boy, who told her point blank, he doesn't believe anything happened. It's all propaganda. To my sister, who has her own horrible story to tell.
This was her son? This is your nephew
That's my nephew.
who doesn't believe it.
No.
How does that make you feel?
Angry. Very angry. Because I know what happened to my sister. Okay, that was traumatic too. And how could he say that? How could he say that? But maybe my sister, it's her fault too, in a way, because she kept a lot of things to herself. She never healed, or tried to heal. At least I tried to heal, but of course it's not that easy. It's not that easy to heal. You know yourself, not easy to heal something that's so emotional.
Right.
And happens at a time when you're very susceptible to that kind of traumatic a thing to happen.
You carry it with you.
It stays with you. She had her days. She had her traumatic experiences, and she had her. She could not use public transportation ever in her whole life.
Do you still carry much of that anxiety? You talked about one of the things that was so difficult was the panic attacks. One of the things that was so difficult was the panic attacks and this out of body. Is that still with you, or do you feel like you've healed from that?
No. I felt disturbed for a while when I knew I had to have an interview. I was determined to have that interview, but at the same time, I didn't know what to expect, and I was really, really nervous about it. And there was a little bit of a unreal thing about it, because I didn't really know how I was going to react.
Sure.
You know.
Sure.
Yeah.
Well,
I was pleasantly surprised.
Well, we're very, very grateful
Yes.
that you've taken this.
I am grateful
big
as
step.
well.
So I want to leave time to bring in your daughter is here.
Yes.
So I wanted to bring her in so we could hear from her a little bit. So Charlotte, I'd like you to introduce your guest here.
Paula, I'd like to introduce my daughter, Gail Borum. Gail, this is Paula Treef. She is my interviewer.
Thank you.
Hello.
Thank you. Hi. So Gail, we're very glad that you could join your mom today. Just the main question for you is really, I know this is not all new to you. I know she has talked to you about this before, although maybe not in as much detail. And she has this book that we're going to show. But is there anything you'd like to share or say about what you've learned about your mother's experience?
Well, first of all, I tend to get emotional, so I hope I don't.
It's okay.
But I think it's hard to listen to the parts where she is a child and the discrimination and the anti-Semitism that she faced fortunately, I didn't face that growing up in this country. Even though I was probably the only Jewish child we grew up in an all Catholic Italian neighborhood. But I didn't face that kind of discrimination or anti-Semitism. So it's hard to imagine what she went through and how awful it was.
Mm-hmm. Is there anything that maybe you'd like to say to her that you haven't said to her about this?
Now is when I'm going to cry.
It's okay. I mean, for me, it's okay.
I don't like to be on camera crying, but just that I'm really proud of you for doing this.
Thank you.
Really proud of you, Mom.
Oh, thanks.
Really proud.
I'm glad I did it. I'm glad.
And I'm so grateful to still have her here at 102. And she's so vital, right?
So vital.
Incredible.
So vital.
But to have that, on record, my family, I'm so grateful for this Shoah Foundation to do this.
So vital. What about you, Charlotte? You see your daughter's emotional, but that I wouldn't say upset. Like, it's good emotional, I think. Is there something you'd like to say to Gail?
There's a time to cry and a time to laugh and a time to be serious and a time to heal or try to heal. Yeah.
When you talked about that earlier about trying to heal, I appreciate that, because I think people often feel like they should be better or they should be over it or something like that. And you've used a couple of times, you've used the phrase, you can never leave the trauma. You can never get past it, but you can try to
at
heal.
times, but not constantly.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm grateful for that.
Mm-hmm.
I'm grateful for to live in a country where, I've had, this country has been extremely good to me by giving me the freedom and the happiness that I felt at times.
Mm-hmm.
Can't be happy all the time. That's not humanly possible, but it's I've got friends, I've got wonderful neighbors. I've always been grateful for those things. I've got a good family who supports me whatever I want to do.
Mm-hmm. Those are the keys.
There are a lot of things to be grateful for.
And I don't know if she said it or not, but she had relatives when she came over here that said, "Oh, just forget about it." Back then they didn't understand PTSD and all of that. Oh, just forget about it. Like, you're here now, you're in this country now. Just forget about it.
Like it's all behind you.
Yeah, right.
Well, you said even the Quaker woman who was helping you in Kristallnacht was saying to you, someday this will feel like a dream, but it doesn't feel like a dream.
No,
still.
No, never did.
Yeah.
No, it went too deep.
Yeah. It's wonderful.
That terrible night is what did it. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And today, if I hear, sometimes they have, I notice when they have, I love music, but sometimes they have something that is exclusively drums. And that just triggers something every single time.
Because
drums,
it reminds you, the sounds remind you?
Well, it reminds me of Hitler's speeches, the rantings and the ravings. He always had these young boys, like a drum corps, and there were maybe 100 little boys in their uniforms beating these drums before his speeches, and that always gets me upset. It always triggers something.
Have you talked about this with your sons, your Charlotte's grandchildren?
The story itself, you mean, or
her experience is not of you again?
Not really.
I wonder about that next generation. What you feel about that?
Yeah, she did a tape years ago. I think I have it, or she did it. I have the script of it. But we've really never talked too much about it. I told them all that she was doing this today. And, but yeah, it's important, very important to carry that on.
Mm-hmm.
You talk about, can I say a couple things?
Anything you want.
We talk now about dysfunctional families, a lot of dysfunctional families with addictions and things like that. But my parents came from a dysfunctional society.
Hmm.
That's how I view it, as a dysfunctional society. So even though her family was intact, very functional, the society was not. It was very dysfunctional, in the way she and other Jews were treated. Um, and, in terms of myself, I feel robbed, robbed of all the aunts, cousins and aunts and uncles I could have had. Maybe second cousins, third cousins, all those people.
Growing up with a very small family.
Very small, yeah.
And knowing
And
they
very,
had
really
lived.
very disconnected. Not very connected, really. Like my one cousin, her sister had 3 children, 2 boys and a girl, and my cousin's only a year younger than I. And I don't think we saw them more than, I don't even know if it was once a year.
Oh,
I don't even think it was once a year. So it was, I want to say that was a lot to do with just, the displacement, and just the whole, her sister's husband also was on the kinder transport to get him out of Germany. And he had a lot of issues, and my dad had a lot of issues, and my father never saw his parents again after he left Germany. His parents were killed. He never saw them again. He was 16 when he came over. That does something to someone. And my aunt and uncle, his other, my father's had a brother and a sister, and the one sister had no children, and the brother had 3 children. But again, we just never saw our relatives.
So you're saying that even the small family, sometimes because of all the things that have happened to them, it affects bonds, I guess, and connection.
I wonder, I wonder what it would have been like,
I thought about that.
Yeah, but yeah.
Anything we want to? I know you have some pictures to show us and a book. Is there anything that we haven't touched on that you want to share? Anything else?
In my album, you mean?
No, we're going to look at those, but is there anything else?
What?
We've talked about a lot. Is there anything we missed? Anything else you want to share? Either one of you.
I don't know. She was such a cute baby. She
Still
was.
cute.
Okay.
She's still cute.
Okay, so we'll go look at the mementos that you have and the book that we've been referring to the whole time.
We're close. We're very close.
I think a lot of what my mother went through held her back in life. I think.
In what sense?
Right? Would you agree that a lot of what you went through held you back in life? From achieving, she's a very intelligent woman. She didn't have the opportunity to go to college, although she was an amazing dressmaker. But I think, and even the way she feels about herself, I don't think she thinks she's all that intelligent. She's very smart, very well read.
Believe me, I can tell you that.
Yeah,
I can tell that.
Yeah, and I think a lot of what she went through really held her back in life. Yeah.
You would agree with that? You feel?
Yes, I do. Yes. Yes. Sometimes when I was in grammar school, it was the custom that when you graduated from grammar school, you went around with a little album and let your teachers write something meaningful in there. And one of them wrote, and I have to translate it into English, one can do a lot if one just has the confidence to do it. And that always was in the back of my mind. But, I didn't have that confidence. Didn't.
Well, you said earlier that this all happened at a very vulnerable time for you, to your age. It's the experience, but also the age of the experience.
Yeah,
so.
absolutely.
All right, let's look at your mementos and your book.
Oh, the book.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
I don't have that. You can go over there. You can walk over there with.
The album. Okay.
Or do you, yeah. So, Charlotte, this is one of the most unique mementos I've ever seen. This is a book that you created. It's 80 pages with pictures of family members, as well as a lot of writing describing who they were, how they were related, and when you knew what happened to them during the war. It's really amazingly impressive. And you wanted us to focus on this one picture here, right there. So what would you like to share about these people?
This is a picture of my mother with her 3 siblings. The man in the picture is her brother, Leopold Frosin, who was severely wounded during the First World War. He's there in his German uniform, and he was a German soldier at that time. He died he was deported with his family to Poland, to a ghetto. And as far as I know, he died during the Warsaw Uprising, Warsaw Ghetto Uprising.
Okay, thank you. So you said that's Leopold, and who are the other people
Okay.
in the picture?
The one on that one is the oldest sister, Ella, who died in 1943 in Auschwitz. That's my mother, Margaret Frozen de Haas. And of course, and that is the youngest sister. Her name is Sophie Landesmann. They were deported to Poland. I don't know their fate. She had a husband, Max Landesmann, and she had a son, Kurt Landesmann, and a little baby, a little daughter, 4 years old, Ruth Landesmann. Yeah. All of them are, were deported.
And what would you like to tell us about these photos?
Okay.
And we'll start with this one here.
No, this is the mother of all those.
What's her
Of this, that's his mother over here. That's the youngest one, Sophie Landesmann. That is
That's
my
this is Sophie here.
yes,
Yes.
that's my mother's youngest sister who was in that portrait
Mm-hmm.
before.
And who's the baby?
There's the baby, Ruth
Oh,
Landesmann. 4 years. Well, of course, she was a baby there. Oh, there's Max. There's her husband, Max Landesmann. Yes.
That's the husband.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay.
And who are in these?
That's okay.
pictures?
That's Kurt Landesmann again, her son. Yeah,
And-
he was deported. He was in a boarding school away from home, and he was deported to a forced labor camp in Riga, Lithuania,
Mhm.
and he was shot when he was 18. And that is little Ruth Frozen, who
No, this says
there
Doris.
she's right there.
Oh, over here.
Yes.
Table down.
We're not on that.
And
picture.
that is my uncle again,
Wait,
Leopold.
no, the same people. And this photo you wanted to show
That's
us.
his little. That's Ruth Frozen, who is Uncle Leopold's daughter, Leopold, and that is my sister Marion. So you can see the difference in the height. Yeah.
Okay. All right. So I wanted to show this page because it captures what this book looks like. It's an 80-page book, as I said. So these are your ancestors, right? So this is Julie Israel Simmons, and she's your great-grandmother. And this is some of the children, which I'm going to ask you about with your grandmother. And then this is Philip Simmons, who is your great-grandfather. And you wanted to say,
That tiny little kid in the chair is my grandmother.
is your grandmother.
Right.
Wow.
She's the youngest of all of them.
Wow. It's amazing that you have pictures that go back generations.
There are
and what
two
you have-
boys. There are 2 boys missing in that picture, but they're probably shipped off to America already. They were.
And what you have written here is that family history, 7 of the 8 children left Germany as young adults. Most went to the USA. My grandmother, Tilly Simmons de Haas, stayed in Germany.
Right.
And that's how the de Haas family continued in
Right.
Germany.
Right.
And in all the other 80 pages, you have anecdotes and memories and photos of the family going back many generations. It's
She
so
had a
interesting.
terrific sense of humor.
And at the end of the book, you have extensive family trees. So this is the Marcus family tree, the Udevald family tree, the Freusian family tree, the Israel family tree. That's a big one. And that's Israel also. And the De Haas family tree.
And that is everything that should be in the album. That came much later. I found it much later, and I never got the chance to put it in. I mean, there's so many pages, and the album can't hold that many.
A ton of information. You have birth dates, and if people have passed away, their death dates,
Yeah,
and where
that's
they
why it's so
lived and
important
how
to
they
have
died.
it copied.
Really, really important. Yeah. Thank you.
So this is a picture of my family and my mom, of course. And this is probably about 10 years old. It's the most current of the whole family. My dad had already passed probably 20 years before that. And these are my 2 boys, my mom's grandsons, Bradley and Mark, and my brother Michael and his wife Barbie, my grandson Jacob, and this is the man I was married to for 45 years and the father of my sons and the dogs. And that was about 10 years ago.
And I just want to, on behalf of the Shoah Foundation and everybody who gets to see this, I really want to thank Mrs. Charlotte Marcus, Gail Buram, for your time and your energy and your commitment to this project. It's really awe-inspiring. Thank you so much.